1973. Yeah, the story starts here, just roll with it. A young man was starting to make a name for himself in the world of Hollywood, George Lucas. Coming off the success of his first two films, the documentary THX 1138 and the famous anime American Graffiti, was getting ready to start working on his third film, with the great ambition of offering the youth another kind of fantasy world to get lost in, just like the world he found himself enthralled with as a kid. He had an idea, he had artwork commissioned for it, made the story into a book that released before the film, and began to pitch it to multiple big-name studios. He brought it to Universal, they said no. He brought it to Disney, they also said no. One by one, every studio that Lucas pitched Star Wars to turned him down for various reasons. For some, it was because his previous film failed to be a success in the box office. Others just didn't understand the story and thought it was weird. But the running theme for rejection across the studios was that no one had faith in the success of a brand new fantasy adventure movie set in space without any known Hollywood actor leading it. All but one man, Alan Ladd Jr. He was the vice president of creative affairs over at Fox at the time, and he alone got Star Wars greenlit and off the ground. Not because he saw a vision from the future of what it was going to be. Far from it, actually, because even he too thought Star Wars was just a weird idea that he couldn't make any sense of, but rather he was so impressed with George's American Graffiti that he saw untapped talent that the man had and wanted him under the Fox family. So because of American Graffiti, Star Wars was greenlit with the low budget of $8 million. Production starts, things happen, it's now 1976, and more money is needed. The initial $8 million was starting to turn into $11 million, and Fox was starting to get mad as they were promised a low production cost. Alan Ladd Jr. became the president of Fox right around this time, and he had to confront Lucas about the increasing costs. And Lucas was prepared with a deal. For the additional production costs, he offered to slash his own salary for directing the movie from $350,000 to just $150,000, and to retain the sequel rights and merchandising rights for the film. Fox saw this deal and thought it was an absolute steal. Yeah, I know it's 2026 and we have the advantage of hindsight. We've all seen Spaceballs, we know exactly what's about to happen.
That kids love this one.
But really see it from Fox's perspective. Before 1977, a movie's success was strictly measured by the performance at the box office. Everything else didn't matter at all. A movie releasing alongside a wave of toys was inconceivable to all the film studios. Sure, it was done here and there, but never alongside the release of a film, and always seeing very little fanfare. At the time, a movie's biggest piece of merchandise was just the logo slapped onto a lunchbox. So hearing that the director was willing to slash his own salary by more than half, while just asking for his merchandising rights and the rights to make the sequels to his unproven space adventure that every studio before them thought it was stupid, man, Fox couldn't agree faster. So with the deal now set in stone, and the production of the film wrapping up, it was now time for Lucasfilm and 20th Century Fox to look for someone to partner up and make the toys. They went to the biggest toy company in the country to pitch a line of Star Wars toys, Mattel. And Mattel didn't want it. They went to Hasbro. They also didn't want it. Just like the process of getting the movie initially made, absolutely no one wanted to work on the toy line, as they all thought by the time the toys would be on shelves, Star Wars would have already been forgotten by the general population.
Keep looking, you'll find someone who cares.
But one man saw something in Star Wars, Bernard Loomis. He was the president of Kenner at the time. If you're not Facebook level of Gen X or not into retro toy collecting, they were responsible for making stuff like the Easy Bake Oven, Play-Doh, and Milky the Cow. Before even seeing the movie, the name alone had already won him over. That, and he said he liked the robots. But funny enough, he was actually just rage-baited by Lucas to acquire the Star Wars license. As the middleman representing Fox Licensing told Bernard, Lucas said if you do Star Wars, then you can't go with Close Encounters. This comment apparently got underneath Loomis' skin, to the point that in the week they scheduled to sign the Star Wars deal, he went out of his way to schedule another appointment days before that to meet with Steven Spielberg, to see what Close Encounters of the Third Kind was all about. He saw it, made up his mind, said something about Star Wars being more toyic, his actual quote, not mine, and signed the Star Wars deal in April of 1977. The movie released in May. But it wasn't like it was going to be, it was a big success. Star Wars fever was everywhere, and people wanted the toys, and Kenner had nothing to show for it. The marketing plan at Kenner changed overnight. They quickly ramped up production in order to meet the Christmas and holiday rush later in the year, but realistically speaking, in order to meet the Christmas season, toys would actually have to be on shelves by August to meet the impending demand. Kenner, understanding that there was just not going to be enough time to tackle this, decided to make the biggest gamble of all time, and sold an entire generation of kids a piece of cardboard that said, "I owe you" that Christmas season, promising the actual wave of toys pictured at a later date. And luckily enough for Kenner and John Star Wars himself, it was a gamble that paid off extremely well. Star Wars. Everybody loves Star Wars. Liar! And in 2027, Star Wars will be celebrating its 50th anniversary. Half a century of a fan base that knows just how to get along with one another.
Turn off the flash, you fucking moron!
And with the recent return of the series to the big screen, I thought it would be fun to talk about the side of the franchise not often talked about. The legal shit. The seemingly boring side of the series, but often the very reason why projects and ideas don't ever leave the whiteboard. Or in the rare moments they do, the ultimate reason why they're erased from history. With stuff like this, it's never really something as simple as they just can't, until it is. Under the legal side, there's always a push motivated by another entity in the name of making money. It's business at the end of the day. A big thing that I and many other fans have wondered for ages is why can't LEGO just give us a CMF line for Star Wars, just like they've done in the past for Marvel and DC? Every time I wonder this, it always leads to the same answer: Hasbro said no. I've never liked that answer because that's all people would say, nothing backing up their claim. So today, I would like to talk about this topic in the best way I can, by overanalyzing every aspect. Listen, I'm sorry, okay? But in order for you to understand why things ended up the way they did, you have to look at everything available. It's necessary information to make this painting as clear as possible for you, so you don't go, well, why don't they just do this? Okay, I'm sorry, but you're gonna sit there, eat your food, and understand just how stupid all this legal shit really is. Deal? Deal. Star Wars is a generational franchise, always having something new for the next wave of kids just coming in, something to call their own. Sometimes it's in a form of a book series that expanded the story forward beyond the original films, multiple times. For others, it was the prequels that led up to the events of the original trilogy, multiple times. And for a select few, their Star Wars was just a bunch of Ewoks every Saturday morning, multiple times. But the best thing about it being generational is that each generation in turn acts as little time capsules of ideas and opinions on the franchise. I think a good example of this is the possibility of knowing somebody's age range just by asking them their opinion on the prequel trilogy of films, or better, their opinion on Anakin in particular. My generation was able to see his fall gradually happen every Friday night. Kids my era were able to see a flawed person struggle with his urges and slowly drift closer and closer to the very thing he sought to destroy. Not in some great lust for power,
Anakin. What? I have 50 million power in Rise of King.
but with the intentions of trying to save and protect those he loved, making his inevitable turn in Revenge of the Sith all the more tragic because we were allowed to grow up and see firsthand what Qui-Gon saw in Anakin all those years ago. While the generation before me saw him as nothing more than a man with a lust for power, a kid who complained how he was being held back from his true potential, who then tripped and became Darth Vader. The added context of a 7-season show really does make a difference, doesn't it? But while the fanbase can often feel tribalistic at times, there's one thing that often shines through the darkness and can bring everyone together besides shitting on each other for the love of the game: marketable commodities. For as long as Star Wars has been around, there has always been a product with the Star Wars logo slapped onto it, except for the brief moment in time when they weren't. I know we just went over how Kenner got the rights to begin with, but it's still an astonishing feat that they even pulled it off. Designers at Kenner got to see the movie early and knew it was going to be a big hit, but no one really grasped that they were about to witness a global phenomenon. Not Fox, not Kenner, hell, not even Lucas himself. The original plan for the line was just going to be some board games and a couple of action figures and a vehicle down the line once the movie release. But their plans quickly changed from a modest release to how much can we make and how fast can we have it. And these plans would only balloon in scale once Star Wars started to open up in different countries. Different markets all wanted their Star Wars toys on shelves just as much, which would only put more pressure onto Kenner. For reference, Kenner was considered to be a D-tier toy company at the time, only really known by the general population for the Easy Bake Oven. Now flash forward a couple of months, they were catapulted to the top, with worldwide demand for their products. But as they tried to get on top of the demand, they ran into some legal problems. Kenner only held the exclusive rights to create and produce their line of action figures and vehicles, and this exclusivity only applied to the United States, meaning that if they wanted to get their products around the world at such a large scale, they would have to open up and work with other campaigns to reach foreign markets. And because of their small size, they did. Kenner acted as both manufacturer and licensor for the Star Wars brand. Everything was made in their factories in Asia, packaged a certain way, and sent off to their new partner overseas. The UK and most of Europe saw their figures produced by Palitoy, Japan had Poppy, and Mexico had Lili Ledi. Now Kenner toys were available around the world. Yippee. But as the time went by, competition started to creep up. Kenner would run into more problems. Their exclusivity only allowed them to oversee the creation of Star Wars toys, but that didn't mean they held control over everything. And to add on to this, Star Wars wasn't released globally at the same time, which allowed a lot of markets to prepare their own adjacent toys that would be in direct competition with Kenner's toys whenever the film would release, at times releasing products before Kenner could even ship. And as the original trilogy would progress, more and more companies would have a crack at producing Star Wars toys for both domestic and international audiences. And back at home, there was a company slowly starting to creep up, with grand ambitions of being the ones on top. Hasbro. Before 1977, they were on track to become the best toy company in the country, dethroning Mattel in their own game, and their tagline at the time reflected their ambition. And just like that, in a blink of an eye, it was all gone. They were suddenly passed up by a D-tier toy company thanks to an IP that they passed up because they thought it was stupid. And because of their success with the original Star Wars line, Kenner would become a heavyweight in the toy scene, able to compete with the likes of Hasbro and Mattel at any given moment. And their success would only grow as they slowly became the lead action figure company by partnering up with even more studios for movie tie-in lines. While Hasbro was still able to compete in the market, at times beating both Mattel and Kenner in sales, this wasn't enough for them. They wanted to be number one. So what do you think their plan of attack was? Were they going to put more effort into their own toy lines, increasing the quality and making them more affordable than the competition? Or do they wait it out and buy the competition? In 1991, Hasbro would go on to buy the Tonka Corporation, Kenner's parent company. By the 90s, Kenner was seeing a successful run of other action figure lines, but their Star Wars well had dried up. And by the time Return of the Jedi released and Kenner's final wave was on shelves, interest started to slowly drift away. The kids who grew up on these toys were now growing up. Their attempts at pumping new life into the line didn't really go as well as they hoped for. And once other toy companies started to make their own Star Wars action figures, they were falling behind. So Hasbro saw this as a perfect time to purchase the company, but not because of the multitude of licenses they would acquire in the process. What Hasbro was really after were the minds behind the toys. To them, the true value in Kenner was the workforce behind it all, and told most of them that if they wanted a feature, they would move over to their offices to help with their own in-house IPs like G.I. Joe.
But too bad your ass got sad.
In their attempt to become the best, they found the cheat code to obtaining it, buying the competition and pillaging the workforce. So, it's the 90s. Hasbro now owns Kenner. Their toy line starts to increase in quality and popularity. Kenner becomes a husk of their former selves, and they get closer to dethroning Mattel. All that's needed now is a new opportunity to present itself that would catapult them to the top. Hey, would you look at that? The start of the 90s saw the birth of retro Star Wars collecting. The kids who grew up with the original line were now entering adulthood, and were able to start tracking down old stuff they missed out when they were kids. And the end of the 90s saw John Star Wars himself announce the release of a brand new trilogy of films that would explore the story that led up to the very first one. The market was different, people were excited, Star Wars was about to be everywhere again, Jar Jar was about to be unleashed, and so the time came for Lucasfilm to go around and grant a company the exclusive rights to produce Star Wars toys for the prequel trilogy. The entire industry saw the monumental success Kenner had with the original trilogy, so getting this license would not only be a license to print money, but would theoretically catapult this company straight to the top at a global stage. The year was 1997, and the final decision was made. The company who was awarded to have exclusive rights to produce Star Wars toys for the duration of the prequel trilogy was Hasbro.
There's no fucking name on that fucking jersey. I ain't get a flag up there. We win the finals. We burning the city down.
Yeah, and a surprise to everyone, Lucasfilm ended up granting 2 toy companies the merchandising and licensing rights to produce toys. The deal between Lucas Licensing and Hasbro was a lot like that original deal with Kenner. Hasbro had the license to produce action figures, vehicles, and playsets, but they were also granted to produce in other categories, such as handheld electronics and small die-cast vehicles. And then there was Galoob. They were considered to be the 3rd biggest toy company in the US, according to this article I'm reading. They were granted the worldwide license to produce action figures, vehicles, and playsets, all in a small scale, continuing the Micro Machines line they had been producing since '92. But part of the deal for Galoob would be Lucasfilm taking major equity in the company and offering a sack of cash up front on top of the future royalties they would be getting. So, if it wasn't obvious enough, Hasbro wasn't really happy about this turn of events. Not only did they look back at all the shenanigans they've been doing for the past decade, plotting the demise of their competitors, buying one of them, making horrible products and slapping their logo just to further tank their reputation, paving the road to be the best just for this outcome. But they also had to deal with Lucas himself. Thanks to the uneasiness around the original film, Kenner was able to walk away with a shit ton of money, making around 75 cents per figure sold, while Lucas himself only made 10 cents per figure, a deal that Lucas himself said was a mistake in future interviews. In Dale Pollock's biography on George, he straight up just says verbatim, "We lost tens of millions of dollars because of that stupid decision." The man was truly subtle with his thoughts, so subtle that it got him into court over this, but it got swept away just as fast. So getting swindled out of his own money is something he wanted to prevent the second time around, meaning whoever got the license would be making significantly less than Kenner, while Lucas would be earning a lot more. That, and Lucas didn't want one company having a monopoly of making Star Wars toys. And finally, a big reason why Hasbro would have been upset at this was because off the bat, these 2 companies would have a conflict of interest. With the knowledge that they'll be making less money, Hasbro was ready to release everything they possibly can. Not only were they going to continue in Kenner's footsteps by offering the same plan of action figures, vehicles, and playsets at that 3 3/4 inch scale, they also had plans of reviving a line of characters and die-cast vehicles that Kenner had briefly made back in the day because their agreement included a line of die-casts, all in a micro scale. Galoob was a company that was only known for producing their Micro Machine line, a line that only consisted of making micro figures, micro ships, and micro playsets. These 2 would be in direct competition with one another on a world scale for the biggest release in media at that point. So Hasbro quickly started the process of congratulating their new partners in crime, excited to share the world stage for the upcoming movie release. And a year later, Hasbro would end up buying Galoob for $220 million in cash. Yeah, apparently despite being the 3rd biggest toy company in the US, Galoob was going through some hard times. Their sales fell by 62% in just 1 quarter. Once Hasbro learned about this, they just bought them up. They did the same thing they did with Kenner, took their manpower back to their own offices, and the die-cast line Hasbro was allowed to make became the Micro Machines line that millions had already known for the past decade. So finally, Hasbro did it. They bested the competition by buying them when they were low. A brand new Star Wars trilogy was just around the corner. Everything was now set in stone for them to become the best toy company in the country. And then LEGO got invited. The Phantom Menace is remembered for a lot of things. Giving us some of John Williams' best work, ruining some of the cast's lives, and leaking that Qui-Gon died by having a track on the OST literally called Qui-Gon's Noble End. But one of the major things that's remembered by those old enough to be around when it released was that it felt like it was everywhere. If it was able to be sold at markets, it was going to get slapped with the Phantom Menace packaging. George Lucas wanted this to be the biggest marketing push for a movie the world had ever seen. A reminder to the rest of the world that Star Wars was back and better than ever. And he actually pulled it off. It's never been confirmed just how many companies was involved with the marketing push for the film. What remains true is that it was a marketing push that no one has ever been able to replicate since. From drinks, to snacks, to gambling machines, hundreds of companies came on board trying to offer their own twist at the galaxy far, far away. While we know that Hasbro would ultimately win the rights to produce Star Wars toys and act as a licensor for the brand, they were just one of countless of names that were pitching their idea to Lucas Licensing throughout the latter half of the 90s. But then something caught their eyes. A company that was never mentioned by name, but judging by the time period, it was probably one of these 2, approached Lucas Licensing with an idea of construction toys for the Phantom Menace. And it was then when Lucas Licensing went, "Oh shit, Why don't we just invite LEGO? So in the same year Hasbro was crowned the rights to produce toys for the film, Lucasfilm was trying to get the attention of the LEGO company. And for a whole year, Lucas Licensing would be the ones to be pushing for the idea of these two giants joining forces. An idea that, funny enough, LEGO was just not interested in. To describe LEGO of the 90s would be one of uncertainty, uncertain of its future, and uncertain of what to do next. After coming off a successful run in the 80s, they were ready to go full steam ahead in the 90s, only to just shoot themselves in the leg multiple times. The 90s was a rough time to be in the toy business. Not only did you have to worry about your competition buying you up because they thought it would be funny, but you had to deal with factors outside of your own control. Big box retail stores offering your brand new items at a discounted price right out the gate, the introduction of video games and television being more widely available to the average family than ever before. And if those two weren't bad enough for a toy company, let's just add the fact that there was a decline in birth rates that lasted the entirety of the 90s. LEGO was entering a toy market that was rapidly shifting, and they were starting to lose money, not just because of the market, but because of their dumbass decisions. Despite entering an era that many consider to be their creative best, they were slowly starting to bleed themselves dry. They were overproducing countless of one-time molds that would only appear in extremely expensive sets for the time. Pair this up with knowledge that most retailers sell them at discounts off the bat, you can see that LEGO was operating at a loss, one that they thought they would just get out of, but they never did. They only made it worse, as in a panic they started to cut jobs and dilute the brand even more by stretching the logistics of the company to its thinnest, as they were starting to produce more stuff outside of the LEGO system, such as miscellaneous items, clothing brands, and opening up more theme parks. All done to course correct their situation, but only got them closer to the brink of bankruptcy. So it's funny to know that when Lucasfilm approached LEGO with the collaboration, they hesitated. Many on staff saw this as their ticket to financial stability, while a lot of the higher-ups saw this as the final nail to their coffin, for a multitude of reasons. For starters, they took pride that LEGO was a family-friendly company, and creating toys around a series of films that dealt with topics like fascism, rebellion, incest, and having the word wars in the title would be seen as a slap to the face to its consumer base, as they would now be selling kids weapons and vehicles of war. In the 90s, LEGO's biggest market on the planet was not the US, it was Germany. The fear was that making a Star Wars line wouldn't just offend its German audience, but it would offend most of Europe, as most of the adults who would be buying these sets for their kids grew up having to hear stories from their own parents about the Second World War, only discouraging the boardroom members even more. In one of these internal meetings, the famous quote that described this side of the company was said, "Over my dead body, will you be launching Star Wars in Europe?" And the last holdover was just working with a third party. The public wouldn't know that LEGO was financially struggling for another year. The revenue gained from this collaboration would be great, but wasn't guaranteed to stabilize the company. Sharing profits with another company wouldn't help their situation at all too. It also meant that they would have to revamp their internal process. Now ideas and sets would have to go through several iterations, not just by their own eyes, but through an eyes of a foreign entity who wouldn't know what they're talking about. It would be a long and exhausting internal battle that would see several people going back and forth with the idea.
You're the reason I'm in this business. Who the fuck are you?
But one that would thankfully prevail thanks to some key figures. Jill Wilfer. She was a brand manager at LEGO at the time, and she was one of many who was spearheading the project, trying to get it across the finish line. In this 2019 Brick Fanatics magazine, she would go on to say that after hearing the boardroom say Europeans would react negatively to the theme, she went to Europe herself to do some research. In particular, mothers in Germany tend to be very conservative. It was called Star Wars. We went out and did some research. What we really heard from the German moms was that they accepted it as fantasy. They also knew that their kids were going to want to have a Star Wars experience. They wanted them to have a LEGO Star Wars experience. So great, Europe wouldn't be raptured. Hooray. While Jill Welfare was in charge of managing the project, there was another person in charge of actually making the pitch itself, Peter Ayo, the president of the US branch of LEGO at the time, and he was pushing the higher-ups to pursue the Star Wars deal. He knew that internally, LEGO designers were already pushing for the brand to do collaborations for years, and he took advantage of that. He would pitch his idea for LEGO Star Wars as being a fantasy battle between good and evil, with the creativeness of LEGO at the focus point. The board members still didn't budge. And so it took one last man to get the deal through. Kjeld Kirk Christensen. Yeah, fuck it, we'll go with that. The grandson of the LEGO founder himself. They fit together, the Lucas storytelling and our creative products. And so after a lengthy year, the deal between Lucasfilm and the LEGO company would be signed in February of 1998, and then made public to the world on May 1st later that year. Finally, the higher-ups were convinced, and all it took was telling them that Europe wouldn't burn, the grandson of the creator of the company getting involved, and LEGO signing away the rights to produce any first-party LEGO space theme that would go beyond the Milky Way galaxy, or any set depicting their in-house archaeologist on his adventures across the world in the 1920s and 30s. Once news broke out about this deal, Hasbro and Galoob were furious, stating how this would affect their existing deals. With just the announcement alone, Lucasfilm had to quickly step in and tell the companies and media alike that their deal with LEGO would not interfere with the other deals set in place, as LEGO would now be producing a line of construction toys that Lucas had been looking for a few years to complete their line of toys. Howard Rothman, the vice president at Lucas Licensing at the time, and the man responsible for reaching out to LEGO, had to tell the press that any ideas that this would disrupt any existing deals were clearly misinformed. Knowing that nothing can legally be done, Hasbro was still set on doing something irrational to show that they meant business. So, in an act of defiance towards Lucasfilm, they would go on to buy Galoob. Yep, just a couple months later, the Galoob purchase was done and announced. In a very comedic and evil villain way, the LEGO deal would set in motion the chain of events that led to another company just dying because of Hasbro's greed. You just know that if it was known earlier that LEGO was financially struggling, Hasbro would have done whatever it took to buy them out to secure that they were the only one producing toys for the Phantom Menace. But while the thought of exploring alternative history is fun to think about in retrospect, the fact still remains the same in our timeline. LEGO was now in the picture, and Hasbro just had to deal with it. I mean, it's not like they could have done anything about it. Besides, these companies were now focused on their final preparations for their part of the marketing. The release of the Phantom Menace was now fast approaching. It was targeting a May 19th release date, which was just a little under a year away by this point. A moment that no one connected with the push wanted to be left out on. It wasn't just going to be another film release, it was a new Star Wars movie. It would have been 16 years since the last one was in theaters. People who were kids when the original trilogy was released now had kids of their own to share a brand new trilogy of films starting with this one. So the thought going in was that this movie was going to do massive numbers. But that's the thing. That was just the assumption going in. Before anyone had seen the movie, the assumption by the general audience, and by the companies in charge of the marketing push, was that it was going to be more of the original trilogy, more of what people liked in the past. So the logical assumption for these companies in preparation was just produce whatever it was you were making in mass quantities, making sure that if someone wanted something with the Star Wars logo slapped onto it, they can go and buy it. The assumption was that Star Wars fever was going to hit just like it did back in '77, but for a brand new generation. So the decision was made to release the product lines ahead of the film release. Just like Black Friday indicating the start of the holiday shopping season, May 3rd would serve as the start of the prequel trilogy era of toys, by releasing them at midnight for children to enjoy, with not a single child in sight. If it wasn't obvious enough from the images on screen, Hasbro was more than prepared. It was finally their time to shine. They observed and learned from Kenner's past and did the exact opposite. Where Kenner was caught off guard by the demand, Hasbro was ready and prepared. A little too prepared, to be honest. Hasbro just couldn't wait to show off that they were #1, so they released a whole wave of the Phantom Menace toys a year early under the Power of the Force packaging. Was this unfair to everyone else? Well, you see,
I don't care.
So when it came time to actually release the Phantom Menace product line, stuff ended up sitting on shelves. Not because they didn't sell, but rather stores just had a lot of stock to put up, leading to a lot of images from the time looking like a wonderland of Star Wars toys. If you've ever wondered why it's so easy to go and find the Phantom Menace toys still sealed in box for very low prices on the aftermarket, well, it's because they were overproduced to hell in anticipation for another 1977 craze. If you could remember the toy shelves back in 2015 before the Force Awakens release, well, just imagine that multiple times over to truly get a feeling just how much Phantom Menace toys were produced. But while the overproduction of products was seen across the board, LEGO was planning on doing the exact opposite and barely release anything. The LEGO plan was to release sets to hit that May 3rd release date, but besides that, higher-ups at LEGO were still unsure about the collaboration. But the designers themselves were salivating at the thought of the Star Wars deal. When the rumors started to spread around the company about the two potentially joining forces, LEGO designers would whip up random prototypes of Star Wars ships as proof of concept of what could be done with the LEGO brick. Once the deal was signed, it was now a race against time to hit that May 3rd release date. But LEGO wanted to first test the waters with the brand, so they planned to release a wave centered around the original trilogy in February. Time was clearly running out for LEGO as they were late to the party. The internal process for launching a brand new LEGO sub-theme can take anywhere from 2 to 3 years. The process starts with concepts, which lead to the pencil visualization stage. Then prototypes are made, which after that, those are sent to kids for internal research. Sets are then picked from that lot and sent to the marketing department, where they have to then look at what parts are needed and how much it will be. Box art is then created, marketing plans are drafted, then after all of that, it ends up on a shelf. A timeline that many at LEGO today say remains true for modern themes. But with the Star Wars deal, now that entire process would have to be sped run, not just to meet the Phantom Menace toy release, which was 14 months away, but they had to meet their own time window of February of 1999, where they planned to release the original trilogy wave, a whole 12 months from the time the deal was signed. Because of these time constraints, LEGO designers on the Star Wars line had to juggle between model building, element creation, and graphic design. 3 jobs that are completely separate today were now done by a single designer just to speed up the process even faster. And if this wasn't already overwhelming enough, there was that foreign entity that designers had to worry about. Anything done for the brand had to go through 2 sets of screenings for approval, one conducted by the LEGO Company and one conducted by Lucasfilm. The perfect balance of the LEGO design had to be intact while the ship and models themselves had to stay true to the Star Wars design while also being appealing to kids from a playability factor. A very time-consuming and challenging process, but one that was going to pay off very soon. In February, LEGO would release their first wave of LEGO Star Wars sets based on the original trilogy of films, testing the waters and getting the public ready for when they released their Phantom Menace wave 3 months later. While everyone under the sun was busting their load and giving people everything they possibly can for the new trilogy, LEGO decided to go the modest route, with a smaller production of sets being produced at a lower quantity in comparison to that of Hasbro with their line of toys. So modest that some stores didn't even get the first wave. You can really see that the higher-ups didn't really have high hopes for the collaboration, and to me personally, it kinda reads off as self-sabotage. Was this a blessing in disguise? Who knows? The Phantom Menace was now in theaters. People witnessed it.
It's going to be one of the many wonders of the world. There are now 8 wonders of the world. One of them being this movie.
People had opinions.
I like Darth Vader.
Okay. He's a little kid. You wanna marry him?
What?
And people started to buy less and less toys. Nowadays that's pretty normal to happen, but everyone in the business had the assumption that this was going to be another 1977 moment. Absolutely nobody planned for a what if the movie sucked scenario. Now big toy stores and big box retailers were stuck with a surplus of the Phantom Menace toys that were getting harder to sell as the days went by. Except for LEGO, where everyone else was struggling to get their shit off store shelves, LEGO was actually having a hard time keeping them in stock. Thanks to their fear of the line flopping and producing less than their competition, it would help their sales dramatically as they had more retailers asking them for more of their product on a daily basis. Add back the fact that some stores didn't even get the original trilogy wave, and you can see that demand was high for LEGO Star Wars. While everyone else was ready to capitalize on the Phantom Menace and the Phantom Menace alone, LEGO's approach of offering sets from both the original trilogy and the Phantom Menace would win fans over in the long run, as they can tap into 2 markets. Fans who were pleased with the Phantom Menace would go on to buy a set from their favorite part of the movie, and fans who weren't pleased with the movie could just look to the left and see that LEGO was also offering sets for movies they liked instead. Thanks to their hesitation, LEGO had found their market, where they can please both fans of the new movies and fans who grew up with the old movies at the same time. Hooray! It all paid off at the end. Where the LEGO higher-ups had their expectations of failure, the actual release of the sets would smash those expectations by 500% by the end of 1999. And this was just the initial offering. There was still 2 more movies worth of time to make sets off of. LEGO had finally found their moneymaker. But while they were celebrating their success, Hasbro was just... they couldn't believe it. They were Hasbro. They made Transformers.
You can't keep me in here, Megatron! Ah!
They did all that tomfoolery just to still end up as second in the very game they rigged from the start. This couldn't be. This isn't fair. What else does Anakin say? I don't know, it's 4 AM and I kinda forgot. After the Phantom Menace release, Hasbro had to come to terms and look at their options. Do they rethink their business strategy and produce less toys at a higher quality and at competitive prices to combat LEGO, offering more playsets and deals to look more enticing to the consumer? Or do they hire lawyers to sniff through the legal agreement and start complaining to Lucasfilm? It's now the 2000s, the era of the see-through future. The Phantom Menace had come and gone, things sold, Stuff stayed on shelves. This vending machine never moved. And Hasbro was kind of left feeling embarrassed. They were prepared for mass hysteria when it came to their toy line. The original trilogy did massive numbers when it came out, but people tend to miss why that even happened. It was the 70s. Children's home entertainment were literally just toys. Home consoles wouldn't become the norm in households for another couple of decades or so. So yeah, every kid had Star Wars toys on top of their wish lists. But now entering the 2000s, things were drastically different. Toys weren't held on such a high pedestal anymore. Kids had options to pick from at the toy store than just a static figure. Competition was now getting stiff. If Hasbro wanted to stay competitive in the scene, they had to improve on their offering. And they did. They began to diversify their offerings in between the new movies. They would start to offer waves of characters from the original 3 films, re-releases of old fan-beloved Kenner vehicles. When time came for the Attack of the Clones, they also had that address. They went from this to figures with better articulation, better accessories, better paint applications. Minor side characters would have a shorter shelf life, and then end up on value packs for the remainder of the line. Hell, they redid some of the Phantom Menace characters with the updated paint apps and better articulation. Star Wars animals would get this treatment too, as they either came with better paint apps, more affordable prices, or just having electronics shoved inside them. Playsets depicting specific set pieces from the film, which was a callback to the latter years of Kenner, would be offered. If the 3 3/4 inch line wasn't doing it for you, well, they were also diversifying their selection too. They would have a wave of 12-inch superposable figures that came with real soft goods, Jedi comlinks, firearms. If it was on screen for less than a fraction of a second, it would be available in the toy aisles in the coming months. Hasbro was offering a wider selection of characters, animals, and vehicles than ever before. Stuff that would satisfy older collectors, and stuff that would appeal to the kids growing up in the era. And this was just Attack of the Clones. The Revenge of the Sith wave would go even harder, with more figures, more value packs, more alcohol. It seemed like Hasbro had finally learned the secret to financial success, by giving the consumers what they wanted. But if you think for a second that their embarrassment with the Phantom Menace and seeing their competition do better than them was what motivated them to start listening to their fans, you'd sadly be wrong. It's a business after all. Only the shareholders are allowed to be right. And all of this was just done to save their own asses. The early 2000s was a horrible whiplash year for the toy industry.
Oh, not again.
Everyone came off the most profitable holiday season up to that point in 1999, only to get hit with turmoil at the turn of the millennium. The toy industry was changing once again. Kids didn't care about toys like they did the previous years. Now all they care about is this fat yellow rat. Toys R Us reported a 75% dip in their profit. Mattel was reporting a loss of over $100 million in potential revenue because there was a shortage of computer chips that were used in toys at the time. And within the midst of all of that, there was Lego. While they were in a situation of their own making, the toy industry going through some shit wasn't really helping them at all. Lego was entering the 2000s in absolute hell. They were burning a lot of money very fast, losing $1 million a day. From 2003 to 2004 alone, sales were down 40%. They were $800 million in debt. It was a downward spiral that seemed to only end with the Lego company going under. It will take a miracle for the company to recover from their impending doom.
On the island of Matanui, 6 mighty heroes rise against evil.
No, I'm not talking about you. I know you're in the middle of typing the obvious miracle that came to save them, but there's more to it than the toys that plays move along every time you look at them.
Join their quest against evil.
The road to Lego's recovery actually started in 2001 with their financial report of the year 2000. It was here where the Lego company admitted they had lost focus by entering too many markets. And entering the new year, they would either cut back or completely abandon projects such as wristwatches, publishing, and other lifestyle products, while also cutting back on software and Legoland parks. 2001 would also start their efforts to push the Lego brand in the United States, Japan, the UK, and other European countries they deemed weren't saturated yet with the brand.
So if you're watching this in Saudi Arabia...
It would also be the year that saw them explore more licensed products with the introduction of Harry Potter sets. Lego had seen the error of their ways, and were now dedicating themselves to doing right by the consumer, starting by focusing back on the very thing that got them popular in the first place, the Lego brick. But one of their active avenues of revenue would also be their Star Wars line. They still had the license to it, and after the success they had with the first year, it was all steam ahead soon thereafter. 1999 would bring us a total of 13 sets, and the year 2000 would see LEGO offering a total of 19 brand new sets. This wave would be a big one, as it wasn't just offering more sets depicting scenes and vehicles from the Phantom Menace and the original trilogy, but it would see LEGO adventuring into other systems of products that fell under their construction toy license. Technic enjoyers would be able to build and display versions of the droids seen in the movie. The model team designers wanted a crack at making a Star Wars set, so they gave us the very first UCS sets LEGO would offer. They gave us a bucket, and to end off the selection, they were offering a line of collectible minifigures for fans who couldn't afford the bigger sets. For a measly $5, you could get 3 characters from across the Star Wars movies. And the best part about this was that it wasn't just a Star Wars theme. LEGO would go on to make minifigure packs for their own in-house themes such as Ninja, Rock Raiders, and City for people to collect. A very nice gesture by LEGO to help out their less fortunate fans. And by the new year, these would never be seen again. At the time, fans were just perplexed as to why LEGO would just give up on this after 1 year of trying it out. Maybe it was poor sales. But thanks to 2026 hindsight, it's pretty obvious to see what may have happened. Now, I think it's very important and legal for me to say that this next part is all allegedly. There was never any real announcement by any company, whether it be LEGO, Lucasfilm, or Hasbro, as to why something may or may have not happened, but knowing how these companies operate when felt threatened, I would say it's pretty safe to make an educated guess on what may or may have not happened. Like my own educated guess, Hasbro did not like that shit. Allegedly. Quick little reminder of the 2000s, the toy industry was in shambles.
This is a fatal condition I got.
It was a battle of the fittest. Almost every company was playing it safe at this time, and LEGO was just releasing a product that they thought fell into their rights to produce, but Hasbro would contest this. LEGO was given the rights to make a line of construction toys for the Star Wars brand. The LEGO brick falls under a construction toy, while Hasbro was given the rights to produce standalone action figures for Star Wars. To you and I, these are two separate worlds in the toy industry, but with one legal problem: the minifigure. Something that should fall in line with the construction toys, right? Technically, in the eyes of the dumb legal system, the minifigure is seen as just another action figure, despite its capability of being taken apart. The minifigure, just like most figures at the time, had 5 points of articulation: right and left arms, right and left legs, and the head can turn around, making them from a legal sense an action figure. Now this alone could look bad for the LEGO group, but what made it worse was that it was sold in a box. The wave only consisted of the minifigure, a plastic stand, and a card readout telling you details of the character you just got. At the time, among all the stuff Hasbro was releasing, they were releasing a wave of action figures that came with a plastic stand for the characters to be displayed on. Now, were these stands completely different than what LEGO was offering, as when paired up with another device they could play sounds? Yes, but on a technicality, without the comm link, they serve as static stands for the characters to stand on. Again, not a good look. So my guess is that Hasbro saw this and got pissed off. They marched to Lucasfilm with this information and demanded that they do something about this because it was infringing on their exclusive rights to produce Star Wars action figures. Lucasfilm obviously did something, which resulted in LEGO not just giving up on their LEGO Star Wars line of collectible minifigures, but put a pause on doing any of this for their own in-house sub-themes for the remainder of their contract. Hasbro had won, and LEGO just had to move on. But this wouldn't be the last time LEGO would attempt to do something similar to this. Years would go by, the prequel trilogy came and went.
It's been great. It's been really fun. I didn't think camping out for a movie with a bunch of geeks would be that much fun, but I fit right in.
And LEGO would make their next attempt at trying to sell minifigures on their own, this time in the form of magnets. 2006 was another year of discovery for LEGO. The company had found their moneymaker, and they were now in a position to start experimenting again with new ideas. They tested upscaled buildable action figures. They were popping up alongside packs of batteries. Mindstorms would see a big push in the classrooms across the world. Board games were now on shelves. This thing. And this year would mark the beginning of LEGO making sets around the Cape Crusader himself. But on top of all of this, 2006 would see LEGO returning to make lifestyle products. More shirts, more watches, more pens. You name it, LEGO was back on their same bullshit of slapping their logo onto it. Yeah, that's a real LEGO product. And alongside all of this, they made magnets. Fridge magnets were a big thing, definitely not just a passing fad of the time, but just like any other company who sees something growing in popularity, LEGO wanted to enter the scene no matter how late they were to the party. They would make several types of magnets, some basic, and some licensed, but the one that started to catch everyone's eyes were the minifig magnets. LEGO was already known for producing minifigure keychains, but the difference there was that those keychains were designed very differently than the standard minifig. And having already gone through the bullshit with Hasbro a full 5 years prior, they already knew that something similar would have to be done if they wanted to keep these on store shelves for longer than a year. And so an idea came to their head. What if we make the minifig the magnet? And that's exactly what they did, as the first run of their licensed minifig magnets were just slightly altered minifigs. There was a magnet tied between the torso and the legs that made it seem like it was glued shut. Part of the legs would be filled, but besides the magnet bits, they could still be used as normal minifigs. The head could come off, they could be seated down just like normal minifigs, but the ultimate test would be if they could survive a year on shelves. And they did. LEGO would go on to offer even more magnet sets from both licensed and in-house themes. People would be able to enjoy buying magnets from Exoforce, City, SpongeBob, and even Batman for a span of a couple of years, until Hasbro woke up. In comparison to their first run, it was clear to Hasbro that LEGO had played their cards correctly this time. Those minifig packs were a violation of their deal because they were unaltered minifigs, but these new minifig magnets were actually altered with the intention of being slapped onto a fridge. This new line of minifig magnets should be completely safe to produce and release, if Hasbro was still operating under their original deal. When it comes to licensing deals, no matter what rules are set in place, it always comes with an expiration date. Nothing is forever. Once the clock reaches zero, it's then up to the parties to come together and assess whether the collaboration was worthwhile. If it went bad, well, both parties separate and that's it. But when things play out well, the deal is then renegotiated and the partnership is extended with new rules. Just like any other companies, Hasbro and LEGO's deals were on a time limit. LEGO's deal would see them last until 2009 before having to negotiate the deal again. But for Hasbro, it was different, as their deal granted them the international exclusivity for the duration of the prequel trilogy. Once Revenge of the Sith was done and over with, then Hasbro would have to come back and negotiate a US exclusivity deal. However, two things would happen that would ultimately cause problems for LEGO's magnets. For starters, Hasbro was just allowed to negotiate their deal midway through. In 2003, they were able to keep their 2005 international exclusivity, on top of getting their US exclusivity deal locked in, and that would take them up until 2018. How the fuck did they manage that? If that doesn't sound unfair enough, they also managed to lower the royalties they would be paying to Lucasfilm. Again, how? So by 2006, Hasbro was already operating by new rules, and LEGO was still operating under their 1999 contract, and Hasbro quickly went to work into ruining LEGO's fun. While the minifig magnets on Technicality were now magnets, as they were altered minifigs being sold, to Hasbro, this wouldn't be good enough. While they couldn't just outright get the line off store shelves like they did last time, they can at the very least steer the ship into the direction they wanted. And so over the years, the LEGO minifig magnets became more magnets than minifigs. They would be placed on magnetic bricks. Some of them were glued onto them, while others could be taken off the magnets, creating this weird inconsistency amongst the line. When it came time for LEGO to negotiate their deal in 2009, the second problem would hit. Instead of getting a new deal with new rules that would take them up until 2019, they opted to just extend their existing 1999 deal. Now, it wasn't all bad for LEGO as I'm making it out to seem. The new extension did grant them access to make more sets for the ongoing Clone Wars TV show. Their minifig magnets were allowed to continue living despite Hasbro wanting to kill it, as they were now more magnet than minifig. And the extension would allow the creation of a line of collectible minifigures for LEGO, thanks to a new rule specifically making it clear that they were allowed to produce sets that contained Star Wars characters, but at the payoff of not being able to produce standalone action figures. So great, new deals and new rules for everyone. How was Hasbro going to make this about themselves? 2011 would hit, and once again, it wasn't looking good for the toy industry.
Oh, brother!
Mattel recorded a loss for the year, and Hasbro did too. It was a dip in sales that couldn't imaginably be the result of their own oversaturation of the Star Wars brand. It couldn't be. It had to be someone else's fault. Let's blame LEGO. Again, all of this is just alleged. There's no way of confirming any of this without some higher up who was employed by these two companies at the time saying so verbatim. But looking at how companies operate, It's just safe to assume and make an educated guess based off the information laid out. So I would say it's safe to assume that after seeing their financial loss for the year, Hasbro would go and approach Lucasfilm once more and make the claim that LEGO's line of Star Wars minifig magnets had finally gone for too long and was now negatively affecting their own sales. LEGO would sadly cave in. As for 2011 and onward, all minifig magnets would see the minifig glued tied to their magnetic brick as to fix the inconsistency amongst the line. But the line itself would soon come to a screeching end, going from packs of 3 to a single one, to then nothing at all in a span of a couple of years after 2011. It's crazy to see just how much pull Hasbro has over the license, always attacking when felt threatened, or just blaming others when they're stupid, forcing other companies to fit under their strict licensing rules. But it's also funny to see all the ways LEGO has gone around just to fuck around with them. Wristwatches can also be a conflict of interest between these two brands, right? It's a watch and it comes with a minifigure. You can't really make the claim that it's a LEGO set, as it comes with an unaltered standalone action figure. Well, the technicality here is that these watches weren't made by LEGO at all. They were produced by another company called QuickTime in association with LEGO. You may be pointing at the screen going, hey, they ended up changing the minifig. But it wasn't done by Hasbro, it was just a last-ditch effort done by QuickTime to save their company from liquidation. It didn't save them at all, and LEGO would go on to terminate the partnership soon thereafter. Other ways that LEGO has gone around the legal wording of their agreement is to just offer the products for free, as Hasbro and LEGO would go on to renew their license again and again, which would grant them more leeway to produce more stuff than they could have before. The loopholes would just get funnier and funnier. For example, Hasbro had the rights to produce lightsaber toys, and they've been making them since The Phantom Menace, which I don't think they have total control over because it's the same classifications other companies use for Halloween costumes. But regardless, they have the rights to make lightsabers, and LEGO does not. Come the time of The Force Awakens, Hasbro would offer a line of higher quality built lightsabers, targeting a new collector's audience. It was just an extension of the Black Series theme at first, but would soon be renamed as the Force Effects Elite line, allowing consumers to both play around with them and have them on display. A line that I would say was a major success for the brand, as it was a cheap alternative to other companies who offered more screen-accurate replicas. Just ignore their current prices. And in 2020, with the launch of the Master Builder series Mos Eisley Cantina, LEGO would offer their first detailed lightsaber hilt for the public to enjoy, Yoda's lightsaber. How did they get away with this? Well, it's because it was a free gift with purchase when you bought the Cantina within the first couple of days. It of course sold out almost immediately worldwide, and there was nothing Hasbro could have done about this because the set itself wasn't directly being sold to the public. It was just something people got for free when they paid for something else during a promotional window. I know the question's gonna get asked, why would Hasbro make a fit about LEGO making lightsaber hilts when Disney themselves are producing higher quality lightsabers and lightsaber hilts targeted towards collectors, which on first glance is a clear violation between the deal with the mouse on their own rights to make them. Well, that's also easy to explain, as those lightsabers at Disney parks are produced by a different company called Shogun World Talent. This company is listed as one of Hasbro's official third-party factories that they themselves listed in 2022, which I would say it's safe to assume that Disney approached Hasbro and told them that their parks would need something higher quality, and instead of making it themselves, they just outsourced the job to one of the other companies they own. So Hasbro has no problem with those lightsabers since they licensed somebody else to do it, but nothing can be done about LEGO making their own line of lightsabers because they aren't profiting off of them. No sales can be made since it's a free gift. This is something LEGO has been doing for years, especially with their poly bags. I know you've been waiting to hear the loophole with these, and it's just like the lightsaber hilts themselves. Every minifig poly bag LEGO has made for the Star Wars brand would technically be an infringement to Hasbro's deal, as they would be selling standalone Star Wars action figures, but the reason why nothing could be done about this is because they were given out for free during promotional windows. 2005 Nuremberg Toy Fair Darth Vader, 2011 Shadow ARC Trooper, 2014 Darth Revan, all completely legal to make and produce. Even under new rules and new contracts that would be signed by both companies, nothing could be done unless it was specifically stated verbatim that LEGO could no longer produce standalone action figures for promotional gifts with purchases. Of course, just like everything else, there's some instances here and there that can get the attention of some lawyers. The 2009 Chrome Darth Vader being one of them. You guys should know already that 10,000 of these were made and shoved randomly into sets during the 2009 wave, making this more of a lottery than anything. But technically speaking, these were sold with sets. And on top of that, technically speaking, the first time anything with Chrome Vader would be done by the LEGO Group was back in 2008, as it was used as a free prize item at an event in Legoland Deutschland, which is why these Chrome Vaders had the copyright year of 2008 instead of 2009. Another instance that I know personally are accounts of people being able to just buy minifigure polybags from stores like Toys R Us back in the day for $5. One of the funny stories I remember reading back in the day was some guy being able to buy either the Shadow Arf or the prototype Boba at their local Toys R Us because the cashier just had a box full of them right at the counter. Was any of that allowed? Fuck no. This shit was highly illegal, sadly, and they were prohibited in doing so, and I'm pretty sure that was only done to get rid of the excess stock. Not like you and I would have given a shit, it would have made stuff easier to just outright buy the polybag instead of spending more money on a set you probably didn't care for. Okay, but what about these? Well, that's simpler. These are produced and made for markets outside of the US. These 3 polybags were first made as GWPs for something called the Daily Mirror, which I think is some local newspaper in the UK. But these 3 were later made purchasable at Tesco's months later. And as for any of the new LEGO Star Wars polybags that just have the minifig inside them, well, these are included in LEGO magazines in Europe. How is this allowed? Different set of rules. Hasbro's deal only grants them exclusivity in the States. And even if they wanted to make a fit about it, the minifig is tied to a magazine that's sold in random gas stations and convenience stores. It's not quote-unquote sold on its own. So after hearing all of this, I think the most logical question people would be having right now is that if LEGO knows the rules, why don't they produce polybags like they do with other themes, where it comes with a minifigure and a small build? They already proved that they can do that in recent time. Well, it's simple. They just don't wanna. When looking back in time and trying to piece together just why things never came to be, it's very easy to get lost in your emotions. Things and ideas that sound like they would have been smash hits if made and released may have just been out of reach for the brand in the time the ideas were being conceived. With the information I just told you today, it's kind of easy for us to see and prop up ideas on just how LEGO could have gotten around Hasbro's exclusivity deal. I'm pretty sure you guys have a lot of ideas on how they could have done it, not just my own. The obvious is something as simple as polybags in the way we know them today would have fallen perfectly in line with their contract, which states they were allowed to produce sets that contain Star Wars characters, but we also don't know if doing so would have provoked Hasbro even more. The 2000s collectible minifigs happened, alright? It's a canon event that just can't be undone. Releasing a line of polybags that included a Star Wars minifig soon thereafter would have probably seen a loud and negative response from Hasbro, one that may have seen them publicly suing the LEGO company for infringing on their exclusive rights to produce standalone Star Wars action figures. It's not entirely out of the realm of possibility to assume something like this could have happened, especially in a time where the prequel trilogy was still actively being released, and the original deals with these brands were still in place and weren't renewed yet with the new rules. You may hear someone tell you they were allowed to do stuff since 1999, but what people fail to realize is that deals change all the time, and when one door closes on an idea, that door cannot be reopened until the deal is renegotiated with new rules. It's not a coincidence that LEGO would attempt to do something similar in the year Hasbro would have lost their international exclusivity for the brand. It's also not a coincidence that Hasbro didn't say anything about it until 2011 when they saw a dip in their sales. It all just boils down to business. In retrospect, it's easy to look back and see that at the end of the day, this constant back and forth bickering, backstabs, and funny buyouts were all a result of companies trying to stay afloat in their own fields and just trying to navigate a forever changing toy industry, and one that seemingly will never stop changing. The 2000s would seem more bleaker than the 90s for the toy industry, and the 2010s would be even worse than those two, which leaves the toy industry of the 2020s being one that looks unrecognizable to that of the previous decades. Entire dynasties would rise and fall, Toys R Us would just die in the US. An industry that once saw kids being its primary target now had to adjust to those same fucking kids growing up. And now the toy market is dominated by a new wave of adults who buy childish products for their collector's value, for the ability to say that you finally have something you always wanted when you were a kid. And now as of recent, I've started to notice a new layer to these new adult buyers, especially in the cases where they now have children of their own. A trip to the toy aisle now serves a dual purpose, as you can get something for your kid while also using that time to get something for yourself. These toy companies have simply learned to adapt to their new market, as it's something they have never seen before. Pillars in the industry are now set in stone, too big to realistically fall, and all offer different products of their own. You go to Mattel if you want Jurassic, you go to Hasbro if you want Star Wars, and you go to LEGO if you want the bricks. Back in the day, you would see every company under the sun throw their hat in the ring in somebody else's field to see how easy it would be to bully someone on their own turf. This competitive scene was pretty common back in the day, but now in the current market, the obvious things companies resort on doing are just official collaborations. These companies have realized that working together only results in net positives for the brand. Same goes with the Lego Company. 1999 saw them almost vomiting at the thought of doing collaboration with another company. But now in 2026, it feels like that's all Lego is doing now. New sets, dioramas, and display pieces targeted towards a vast range of audiences and demographics stay on shelves today because the Lego brand knows they sell. The Lego Company of today are not worried about targeting the super fans of Lego, but they're actually targeting the casual fans of Lego and fans of the IP it's partnering with. It's all for the simple novelty that their favorite thing is now an official Lego set, sometimes to lukewarm reception, but other times it's met with a holy shit response. An example of this was none other than Lego and Hasbro joining forces for the Optimus Prime set. The Icons line for Lego allows them to approach third parties with the idea of a collaboration. From my understanding, it's usually Lego going around and approaching companies with the idea, and many fans thought this was the case for the Optimus Prime set. But as a shock to a lot of fans, it was revealed in an interview with designers that it was actually Hasbro who were the ones to approach Lego with the idea of this being made. And a funny little tidbit about the set, the designer, Joseph Patrick, actually worked at Hasbro as part of the Transformers team before moving to Lego. A lot of people were shocked at this tidbit and were excited that it just opened the door for more collaborations between the two giants, and over the course of time, it has resulted in these two becoming a lot closer than they were in the 2000s. Which gets a lot of people wondering, now that these two are a lot friendlier to each other, what if now is the perfect time to release a line of Star Wars CMFs? Yeah, the answer's still gonna be fucking no. Doesn't matter how close two companies can get to one another, hell would have to freeze over before Hasbro would just give up their biggest moneymaker like that. These two are still corporations at the end of the day, only worried about making as much profit from their consumers as possible. It'd be the stupidest decision done by Hasbro this decade if they let their competitor make products in a field they have full creative control in. And in a funny twist, it'd be the stupidest thing Lego could do. Lego is just like the rest of them, a giant faceless corporation. We know the loophole. We know that it can be done and sold by itself. They know the loophole. They know that it can be done and sold by itself. But the Lego Group has spent decades observing that their Lego Star Wars fans would buy up anything at any price range if it has a specific Star Wars character they have always wanted in minifig form. They may have lost their extremely loyal fanbase in recent times because of stuff like Smart Bricks and the new Turbo Tank, but to the benefit of Lego, whenever they end up losing a loyal fan, there's always a new guy just walking in ready to get into the hobby for the very first time and start their collection. John Capitalism did famously say that a sucker is born every second. So whenever you ask yourself again, why can't Lego just give us a Star Wars CMF, even though there's a clear loophole that could be used and abused? Well, it's simple. It's all because Hasbro said no.